Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to offer my amendment to H.R. 702. This is the only amendment that the majority would allow in order to help us understand the impacts of lifting the crude oil export ban on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, before the Rules Committee, Ranking Member Pallone and I offered two other amendments that would have more proactively studied the increase in greenhouse gas emissions caused by this bill. Instead, the majority only allowed this amendment, which requires that the Department of Energy do a report on the increase in greenhouse gas emissions caused by the lifting of the crude oil export ban, but still allows the ban to be lifted. This is what the legislative process has come to, unfortunately, in this chamber. Instead of analyzing full impacts before voting, the majority has adopted a pollute first, ask questions later approach. Repeal the restrictions on fossil fuel extraction and production, and then we'll figure out the environmental impact later. Now, lifting this 40-year-old ban on exports could increase oil production by as much as 500,000 barrels a day. That's a significant increase that risks expanding production into sensitive areas off our coasts, on our public lands. And according to the Center for American Progress, this surge in production would result in an additional 515 million metric tons of carbon pollution each year. That's the equivalent of an additional 108 million passenger cars on the road, or 135 coal-fired power plants put online. That's what this bill could do. And that's why over 40 environmental groups are opposing it. Now, my Republican colleagues might dispute this study. It's the Center for American Progress. And so when we hear studies from any group that's not funded by the fossil fuel industry, we typically hear them accused of being biased, left-leaning sources. And certainly they're welcome to make that argument. But doesn't that support the need for an established, nonpartisan source of assessments on the impacts to our environment for bills that this Congress considers? That's why today, Mr. Speaker, I am also introducing the Carbon Pollution Transparency Act of 2015. This is a bill that would require the CBO to estimate and report on the projected carbon footprint of each bill Congress considers. That way we know before we vote how a bill would impact our climate and our environment. Now, members of Congress already rely on the fiscal impact estimates produced by the nonpartisan CBO to help us make good decisions, make up our minds. But we need to also take into account the environmental consequences of our votes. The American public has the right to know whether their representatives in Washington are voting to help harm the environment, to worsen climate change, or whatever the impact may be. And that's why my bill ensures that we have a fair judge, the CBO, for each bill that we consider on its environmental impact. But today, we at least have an opportunity to require such a study as part of H.R. 702. It's not enough, but it is a step forward to fully understand the impacts of lifting the crude oil export ban and potentially the harm that would result to our environment. So I urge a yes vote on my amendment and a no vote on the underlying legislation, and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I rise in mild opposition, and I may change my mind depending on what the gentleman says.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to make a deal with you. We want to be open and transparent. We're the open, transparent Congress. We'll accept your amendment if you voice vote it and at least consider voting for the bill. But if you're going to roll call vote it and vote against the bill, then I'll oppose it and we'll defeat you on the roll call vote. So I'm going to make you a deal. You can say, I'm not saying you have to vote for the bill. I'm just saying I want you to think nice thoughts about the bill and consider voting for the bill, and then we will accept it on a voice vote, but we don't want any roll call votes.
Texas, be advised to direct the remarks to the chair.
Well, I hope you were listening, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to yield to my friend from California, if I have time to yield, to see what his thoughts are.
Well, through the chair, I would say to my friend, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think there could be anything more transparent than going on record and voting on these.
So you're going to ask for a roll call vote?
I am going to ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. Speaker, I oppose the gentleman's amendment and ask every member to vote against the amendment. If I still control the time, Mr. Speaker.
You do. Time is yours.
We're not violently opposed to this. It's a study. I'm confident that this bill will, on a net basis, reduce greenhouse gases because the oil that would most probably be exported is produced under the strictest environmental regulations in the world. It also happens to be the easiest oil to refine because it's light, sweet, which means it doesn't have a high sulfur content. And when you run it through the cracking process, because it's lighter, it tends to separate into the various refined products more easily. So the gentleman's amendment is benign in nature in the sense that if we were to conduct the study, I think the results from the study would be positive. But since this is a getaway day and everyone has planes to catch,
will the gentleman yield for?
I'll be happy to yield.
Thank you. So to my esteemed colleague and coach of the baseball team, in the spirit of thinking good thoughts, if you will think good thoughts about considering the impacts to our environment and our climate, I will accept your previous offer to voice vote this amendment, and maybe all of this great good thought stuff will get us home faster.
Reclaiming my time, I commend the gentleman for his thoughtful understanding from Mr. Pallone, and with that, we accept the gentleman's amendment and ask everybody to vote for it on a voice vote.